Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, February 11th, 2022, and today we're going to be talking about the state of Alabama and the brand new congressional map that was passed into law by the Republican-controlled state legislature and signed into actuality by the Republican governor here. The state of Alabama essentially was brought up to the three-panel judge that deals with the region on the federal level towards the state of Alabama. You're talking about a district court here, and what you found was that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party pretty much were at odds over this map. The Democrats made an argument to a Republican-controlled court that the state of Alabama unfairly diluted the power of black voters in the state of Alabama. For instance, looking at the state itself, it has a 26% black population, yet on the congressional maps, they only get a singular majority-minority district that would ultimately give the minorities in the state of Alabama a total number of 14% of representation. Now, the Democrats argued that this was unfair, that this was violating the Voting Rights Amendment, and to a very large surprise, the state of Alabama's district court essentially said the answer is yes, it absolutely does. It was a decision of 3-0. So that decision, first of all, would have made it elevate all the way to the Supreme Court if it was to be questioned, which it did. But that decision essentially was done by, I believe, one Democrat and two Republicans. The two Republicans were appointed by President Trump. These are conservative-leaning justices, and they made the decision that, altogether, that this map was simply unfair. Putting aside partisan lines, putting aside who would stand to benefit from this on the national level, the argument was made that it is, in fact, diluting minority voters, considering that they get about 0.5% of representation of what they actually have in terms of the state's overall population. And I think that's where the major concern here came for the Democratic Party. And that victory in that lower level court was a major victory for the Democratic Party. They saw this as some type of, major indicator that the states of Alabama and potentially some others might actually move further down the line and potentially have to draw an additional congressional district for the Democratic Party, simply because of their high minority populations. For instance, an argument was going to be made in South Carolina, a state with a very high black percentage in terms of the population, and what you find there is that there's only a singular Democratic congressional district. In the state of Louisiana, the same thing here. So far the Republicans are moving forth with just a singular Democratic district, but they actually need a Democratic governor to sign off on their maps, which it doesn't look like they're going to get, so they might be in a position of stalemate, and it might end up getting elevated to an additional court that would make an additional ruling. But the state of Alabama appealed. The state of Alabama decided to take this case to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court didn't rule on it entirely. What the Supreme Court did was, in a vote of 5-4, said that this new map needs to be, overturned. You need to revert back to the initial map until we make a decision on whether or not this does in fact violate the Voting Rights Amendment and, what type of precedent can be set. So the Supreme Court finally has the ability to go ahead and, challenge this map and go ahead and challenge some key provisions of the Voting Rights Amendment. It is entirely possible that they rule that majority-minority districts are no longer constitutional, or at least not necessarily constitutional, but no longer a requirement within the Voting Rights Amendment. That's why some Democrats are, That's why some Democrats are a bit upset about the fact that this is now going to the Supreme Court. But what we actually heard from Justice, I believe, Brett Kavanaugh, was that this decision to keep the map in place was not an indicator about, the voting rights law. It's not signaling a change. It does not make any change. Simply all that it is doing is ensuring that the map that was passed previously would go ahead and be upheld. Surprisingly enough, Justice Roberts decided to join 3 liberal justices in dissent, saying that he believes that there was no real reason to get rid of the map that was put in place. There's nothing striking out against it that is negative, and I think that's something that the Democratic Party was not expecting to get. Justice Roberts has been very adamant in the past in terms of cases that have to deal with similar issues such as this, that, different provisions of the Voting Rights Act, I don't know entirely if he believes in them or if he believes them to be constitutional. I think that's a question for later down the line. But the fact that he joined the 3 liberals was quite surprising. In most cases, I think people expected this to be a 6-3 decision. Now, this was an interesting announcement from the Supreme Court. They didn't rule on it before the court redistricting officially underwent. What you found was that the new map had already begun drawing, and the state of Alabama was working to find a new map that abided by what the lower court had decided. But later down the line, what you found was that, just that same day, the Supreme Court all of a sudden says, wait, don't do that. We're going to go ahead and move forward with the older map, and then we will make a decision. So the Supreme Court is about to pick this up later down the line, which means this is going to happen around the fall timeframe, which isn't the worst thing, I would say, for the Democratic Party. There is a possibility that the state of Alabama does get forced to put back in a map. I think that that is something that could be possible. Keeping this map in place is not a good sign, but people's opinions can change over the span of months. And if they're being actively petitioned, through oral arguments later down the line, they could hear something that they didn't capture the first time or make a decision that is different than their initial one, because Justice Roberts probably won't be siding with the liberals if he gets an actual chance to do so. But I do think that there is also the possibility that the map from the previous one that was forcibly redrawn in terms of 2 Democratic districts could very well be implemented in the state of Alabama in the future. But what I've gathered from this is that if the state of Alabama, ends up with the Supreme Court case shooting down key provisions of the Voting Rights Act, meaning that, majority minority districts are no longer a requirement, which is something that could come out of this. The Supreme Court could rule that there isn't a need for it, and that, that is the legal precedent that has been set. That would mean that states such as South Carolina, Tennessee, Mississippi, many other states that have a singular Democratic district or have a couple that are protected by the Voting Rights Act will no longer have to protect them. Instantly, what you will find is that Democrats will gain in Alabama, they will gain in Tennessee, they will gain in the state of Mississippi, they will gain in South Carolina, because they will gerrymander the map to benefit the Republican Party very substantially. And it's something that you wouldn't exactly expect them to not do. In the state of Tennessee, what we found was that a district that did not have a protection by the Voting Rights Act was simply diluted, and it worked effectively. The state of Tennessee used to have 2 Democratic districts, one that was safe on both sides, Memphis, Democrat plus 53, Nashville, Democrat plus 17. In the new map, what they did was kept Memphis, it's now Democrat plus 43, diluted a bit of the Democratic vote, and then they cracked Nashville. They turned the 5th district, which used to be Democrat plus 17, into Republican plus 15. They took the 4th district and made it Republican plus 46. The 6th district made it Republican plus 35, and the 7th district, which made it Republican plus 21. The Republican Party effectively cracked Nashville, and that's a done deal. And you can certainly expect that in many of these states, if the Republican Party gets free will when it comes down to the Voting Rights Act as a means of, getting rid of it and getting rid of majority minority districts. If the Republican Party didn't have to do it, I don't think that they would do it. The Democrats, however, absolutely would. Or at least they would do it in a way that would allow minority voters to be expressed in many different congressional districts, potentially landing the Democratic Party victories. So the Supreme Court announcement here definitely was something the Democratic Party was not hoping for. They were really hoping that this silence from the court essentially meant that the Supreme Court decision wasn't going to come out, there wasn't going to be one, that they were simply going to ignore it. I mean, the Supreme Court doesn't take up every single case that they get. It is only in specific circumstances do they actually adhere to it. But it was very unlikely that they were going to ignore a case that is brought up by a state. I think that what we find in the state of Alabama is that, the courts saw this as a necessary thing to make at least some type of momentary opinion on. And I also think that the partisanship aspect of it was something that did get to some of these more conservative justices. They saw that in the old map, the GOP would pose an advantage over the Democrats, and they decided that they should end up using the old map, even if it does later down the line end up violating the Voting Rights Act. The Supreme Court now has the ball in their court. They have, everything on their side. They now have everything to work towards, to get rid of different provisions or to enhance them or to secure them. Everything is up to their discretion. And Democrats and Republicans probably are a bit worried, but I would say Democrats more so than Republicans for very obvious reasons. The Supreme Court here continues to show its conservative lean. Had there been a Ruth Bader Ginsburg or someone similar on the court right now, that Alabama map would have stayed in place. The new map would have stayed in place, not the old map. And I think that that is something that we also need to consider when it comes down to the Supreme Court, when it comes down to, voters across the country. The Supreme Court, if brought up additional cases, could very well decide to make decisions like the one in Alabama. Return to a gerrymander that, benefits the Republican Party. But the good news for Democrats is that Alabama isn't similar to many other states when it comes down to how this petition was made. This went to a federal court. The state of Ohio did not. The state of North Carolina did not. Many of these states, Pennsylvania did not. They went to the state Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court has already stated that they have no say on top of what the state Supreme Court says. They are the final verdict when it comes down to state affairs. So when you see a map in Ohio struck down or a map in North Carolina struck down by the state Supreme Court, the answer is no. It cannot go to the Supreme Court beyond that and be stricken or put back into place based off of precedent, based off of what the Supreme Court has said historically, and based off of how they are acting now. The state Supreme Court seems to be the end-all be-all, and since it didn't go through the standard type of process as to which laws are challenged and brought to the Supreme Court, it is in a position now where what we are going to find is that the Supreme Courts of each state are going to have the final say. And I think that the Democratic Party is actually very happy about that. There is a Democratic majority in the state of Ohio. There is a left-leaning majority in the state of Ohio when it comes down to the new maps. Same thing in North Carolina. Same thing in the state of Pennsylvania. And they also have some of their own states where there actually is, a case going on about the legitimacy of some of these maps. For instance, in the state of New York, what you will find there is that all of the justices there are Democrats. There's no real worry for the Democratic Party. In Illinois, there's no provision or nothing written in their constitution that says partisan gerrymandering is illegal. So for what the courts decide right now, that is simply just within the law. Is it right? No. But it is something that does not violate the law like you might expect. So I think that it is going to be quite interesting watching what the Supreme Court decides to do later down the line. The midterm elections could very well have an impact on this. I think that there is something to be said about the Republicans potentially winning later on in November. If Republicans begin to gain momentum and begin to continue to expand in terms of Joe Biden falling in approval in terms of their generic ballot lead, it is possible that the court decides to double down on the Democrats by upholding maps and actually removing key provisions of the Voting Rights Act. I don't think it's something that they should do. I don't think it's something that is advisable for them electorally in terms of the Republican Party, but it is something that I could imagine happening, and I think that always needs to be considered. There is so many possibilities that the Supreme Court now has, and the Democrats probably should be very scared. I think that's something that definitely needs to be discussed. And looking at the state of Alabama, it was already a long shot expecting the map to change drastically. What you will find is that outside of 2006 and 2008, the Democratic Party at most was winning 2 seats across the state of Alabama. The last time that we saw a competitive election was in 2016, where Alabama's second was competitive by 9.2. Then in 2018, of all years, it ended up going by 23 to the incumbent, and then in 2020 went by 31. I mean, it just simply wasn't a close race. The only other time was in 2014. In 2010, it seemed to be close. Very interesting. I'm wondering why this actually happened in 2016. If anyone could provide some context, maybe this is a candidate who individually was very powerful across the state of Alabama, but it is surprising to see the second district so narrowed up in Hillary Clinton's election. But, that's besides the point. What we find here is that the state of Alabama was definitely out of the ordinary to have any more than 2 congressional districts for the Democratic Party. And over the past 10 years, it is very out of the ordinary to see anything but 1 Democratic congressional district. I think that moving forward, the Democrats are probably going to petition less. Seeing that the Supreme Court now has the ability to strike down key provisions of the VRA that they simply don't want to see gone, Democrats are going to realize that fighting for things might end up backfiring, as it might in the state of Alabama. Had they completely left it alone and decided to stick with what they've been used to for the past 10 years, it is possible that this would not even be at the Supreme Court today. In fact, probable that it would not be at the Supreme Court today. Looking at Louisiana and South Carolina, those aren't going to change. You're not going to see, Democrats expand the number of seats that they have because of a Supreme Court ruling, because of the lower court ruling. That's just not the case anymore. That is no longer going to apply. I covered that back when I talked about it a little bit earlier on. I said this is going to be a possibility. I don't think it's a possibility anymore, and I don't think many people expect it to be a possibility at this point in time. Democrats are probably not too worried. I think that the map itself overall comes out in a positive manner for them. They are gaining seats in Illinois. They are gaining seats in California. They are gaining seats in New York. They are solidifying their Democratic incumbents across the nation. But looking specifically at the state of Alabama, that simply is a victory that is no longer there. And I think that the Democrats should definitely keep some type of, caution when it comes down to petitioning court cases, petitioning maps in the future. That's always going to be a moment of concern. So, overall, what should we take away from this? I think that we should take away that Alabama is going to be in place through at least 2022. There's a lot of speculation that the Supreme Court is going to strike down parts of the VRA that protect maps, protect districts, like the one in Alabama that is a Democratic district, Alabama's 7th Congressional District. That is a concern for the Democratic Party, and it is something that is a reality. There are also some people on the left who think that the Supreme Court will actually uphold the new map, that they will decide that there needs to be an additional district, that they will revert back on what they are seeing right now. My prediction situation, what I expect is that the Supreme Court decides that there doesn't need to be an additional district, that the the lower court overstepped their boundaries, that they petition for something that should not be there, but also that the Voting Rights Act does need to remain in place, that the VRA does need to be kept intact, and these majority-minority districts are helpful for democracy and helpful for minority representation. But that's just my take on it. I think that the Supreme Court probably won't go to very extremes, especially with Brett Kavanaugh sort of being reassuring to some of those Democrats that this is not an indicator of anything about voting rights. This does not signal any changes. Typically speaking, these Supreme Court justices are a little bit more vocal about what they are eventually going to do, and I think we can see that clearly with issues such as the abortion case, but I don't see that in terms of this redistricting process in Alabama. So a lot up for discussion, a lot of speculation, a lot of discussion about what's going to happen. Nobody knows for sure, but we will find out hopefully by the end of this year. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.